So
I want to bring in Robert Costa in Washington, D.C. Robert, as we see the boyhood home of the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter, your thoughts about not only Jimmy Carter's youth, shaped by his father and his mother, clearly in the biographies, I know Doug Brinkley knows this, his father, an imposing presence in his life, one who was stern, a taskmaster, one whose love and adoration was sometimes not as forthcoming to Jimmy Carter as a boy as he would have preferred, and that was one of the drivers in his life, not only satisfying himself, but hoping to live up to the standard his father set.
And as Douglas Brinkley's great books and work on Carter show us and reveal, he, like so many of us, took qualities of both his father and his mother into his own personality. There were those steely blue eyes that could be as competitive and ruthless as anyone, but also this gentle spirit that was forged in a place like Archery, Georgia, in Plains, just down the road. As a reporter for CBS, I've had the honor of going down to Archery to see this boyhood home, and we've done a feature on the boyhood home for CBS News. And whenever I talk about that trip to fellow journalists or anybody, I just tell them you got to get down to Archery. You have to go down to Plains, because even in a time in this country that feels turbulent, historic, people have their own emotional and personal views about what's happening in the country, some embracing this time of turbulence, others unhappy about it. When you go down to Plains, you see in a nonpartisan way the specialness of the United States, that for all the racial challenges that region in this country has endured and continues to deal with on many levels, the Jimmy Carter story coming out of this tiny home, when you're walking through that home, it's small, it's on a farm, there's still chickens in that boyhood home you're seeing right there, walking around the property, and Carter and his family would have to walk a long walk into Plains to get to school oftentimes. And you see that if Jimmy Carter in this century, in the last century, was able to become president of the United States with no real connections, all because of will and how this place shaped him, it does inspire you, even if you have your own concerns about the trajectory of the United States, because it wasn't that long ago that this person who came out of this boyhood home in Archery, Georgia, was able to rise. And when you go to his school down the road, which is now a wonderful museum, and I walked around Plains with Jill Stuckey, one of his closest friends, you learn that Carter was just determined not to make it out, but to take Plains with him on his journey.
That's right, and he kept it with him. You're looking at a live look right now of Plains, Georgia, as the people line the street there. We want to go down to Mark Strassman. We believe that the motorcade will be passing by him momentarily, if not already. Do we have Mark Strassman?
Yes, here's the hearse now. 39th President of the United States, just past us.
And Mark, what's the mood down there? I mean, we don't hear anything. It seems very quiet, and people have the American flags, but I would imagine there's some tears there too. But as me and Major were talking before we started, this is really a moment to celebrate his life, to honor this man who did so much even after becoming the 39th president.
And I think all of that is part of what's happening here. But I think in this moment, Eureka, you have to remember that this to them is not just the death of a president, but a death in a small town. And many of these people, his friends and neighbors, had a personal relationship with Mr. Carter, and for them, there's a realization now that is over. And so the crowd grew here over the last hour. There are probably several hundred people here, which may not sound like a lot of folks until, again, you consider what a small town, what a small community Plains really is. So it was very quiet when the hearse passed by, very, very somber, very respectful. And I think in the days ahead, you're going to see some of that celebration that you talked about, Eureka, but I think in this moment, it's more just a moment of solemn reflection.
And Doug, it's worth pointing out, as we talk about this small town American story, Jimmy Carter walked some of these country roads in bare feet by choice. He liked to do that. He did the kind of things that a child in America now simply cannot imagine. He was working on the farm at a very early age. He was driving a vehicle at a very early age. He was plowing fields at a very early age with a mule. He was using a knife, wielding it to kill animals for the family consumption. He was living a deeply rural, involved, able life as a child.
with no electricity, and they used to have to use what they call slop buckets for going to the restroom. At Archery, his father, all the animals had to have a purpose, meaning to be killed. They would butcher hogs. The chickens had to give their eggs. The exception was a pony. And Jimmy Carter got very protective that the pony actually gave him rides places, so the pony could stay with them. The pony ended up having offspring, and they would give them away. But this pony became Carter's close friend. The big change from that agricultural moment, though, is in Plains. President Carter told me when the Georgia state opened an agricultural way station. That's the bleed over effect from the New Deal of soil conservation service, of what pesticides to use, how do you grow a new kind of hybrid plant. And it's right there down the road from Carter's house. He'd go there all the time and talk to those agricultural specialists. So when I went with Carter to places like Haiti, he would meet somebody in need, and he would go say, I'm going to go through the ag station in Georgia. You need 2 tractors. He'd write them down, and then they'd find what they needed in Haiti. Wow. So he had his whole, he was a little bit of a jump ahead on modern agriculture, living just down the road from a station like that.
Not a passive farmer, but someone who studied agronomy and worked on it very well.
And the bad side effect was after World War II, we started spraying all over there a lot of pesticides. So you have his family, when Carter was in the Navy and away, his family dies of pancreatic cancer. Right. Many think from the sprayings of DDT-like substances. So his mother died of pancreatic cancer, and brother Billy, sister Gloria, sister Ruth, and
certainly a genetic component.
On, a genetic component, and they all died of pancreatic cancer, where Carter was in Hawaii, Carter was in Asia, Carter was in New England, and he avoided that horrible disease.
And when we speak about his childhood, I want to turn to Nicole Killian, just about the influence that spending time with African-American families also had on him, because his father had this farm. You had a lot of African-American families that were sharecropping. He talks about being the only white family in Archery.
Yeah, that's right, Rick. And I do want to point out, because you can kind of see it in that image there, that big farm bell that is suspended above the crowd there, which really is about the title of his book, one of his many books, An Hour Before Daylight, because that bell would ring an hour before daylight, before, when the family would rise and tend to the crops, tend to the livestock. And so there is a lot of significance there. We will hear that bell ring 39 times today in honor of the 39th president. But as you mentioned, the president at the time, when he was a young boy, worked alongside not only his family, but among a number of African-American families who lived in the community, some of whom were tenants on the farm. He talks about one family in particular, the Clarks, a woman by the name of Rachel Clark, an African-American woman, calling her one of the most remarkable and most significant, someone who had one of the most significant and lasting impacts on his life, someone who taught him, in his words, how to behave, shared religious and moral values with him. So he really credits not only African-American women with his rearing, in addition to his own parents, but also these life experiences that he had alongside African-American children, where he didn't see color at the time, at a time of great segregation in an era of Jim Crow. And so that is certainly something that has shaped his views as he evolved into an adult.
Nicole, you have beautifully set us up for this moment, which I want to describe. The motorcade, as you can see, coming to a very gentle stop in front of Jimmy Carter's boyhood farm in Archery, Georgia, just a few miles from Plains. It's now part of the Jimmy Carter National Historical Park. The National Park Service is honoring Carter with a salute, and by ringing, as Nicole indicated, very soon, that farm bell that Jimmy Carter wrote about in that book 39 times. Because, of course, 39, recognition of Carter's place in our history, 39th President of the United States. When that begins, we will let you know who's ringing the bell. Should happen momentarily.
And we see the folks there saluting the motorcade, saluting the flag, and here goes the bell ring.
And in such intimate, historic moments, it's worth noting that is Park Ranger Randy Diller, who rang the bell 39 times. Drika?
The late president is now officially on his final journey to Atlanta. That's where we find CBS News correspondent Skylar Henry at the Carter Center. The former president's casket is scheduled to arrive there later this afternoon. Skylar, good morning.
Hey, Drika, good morning to you. 140 miles. That is the distance between Plains and downtown Atlanta, where we will see that motorcade stop at the state capitol here in the city, symbolizing his ascension, if you will, politically speaking, from state senator and governor. He will be greeted by the current governor, Brian Kemp, along with the mayor of Atlanta, as well as other top state officials, before making his way here to the Carter Center, where there will be a private service here that is set to kick off at around 4 o'clock today. And as it goes, as the story goes, this is a place that came to the president in a dream. He said that he did not want this place to be simply a monument to him. He wanted it to be a working facility where he could host world leaders and also look to do other things around the globe, whether that mediating conflict around the world or looking to push forward as it relates to solving health issues and humanitarian crises around the world. And since 1982, this has been a beacon in so many ways of that. In fact, the people that we spoke with here, the staff and volunteers who run this place, have all talked about the work that the Carters have done and how intimate they were with that work. I'm thinking of Buddy Smith, one of the groundskeepers here, who helped build the Carter Center and then eventually got a job here back in 1986, who talked about the work that the president did every single time he came to the center and how he grew to know him intimately, so much so that the two would go to Atlanta Braves baseball games. I'm thinking of Laura Newman, one of the senior advisors for the Carter Center, who worked with the president intimately, and the president actually helped her with the adoption of her child. And that is just something that we have grown to learn over the course of this week, just the intimate relationships that not only the president but Rosalind Carter and how they have grown to just build this bond here with the people who work here at the Carter Center. And so we will see them at that private service a little later on this afternoon. We will also hear from the eldest Carter child, Chip, along with Jason Carter, their grandchild, as well as several others from the Carter Center, including the CEO, Paige Alexander. We will also then see a series of hymns and performances from the Morehouse College Glee Club, as well as others, as they look to reflect and remember the life and legacy of the 39th president.
Skylar Henry, thank you very much. So as the motorcade moves away from that bell that we just heard ring in the early morning, clarion sound, suggesting, underlining, it's not just a bell. The 39th president, to make sure that was abundantly clear, painted his own version of that farmhouse bell in 2003. It's oil on canvas, the title, Farm Bell, and hangs at the Carter Center.